Now, I really did not want to go to New Orleans. It was a part of the church internship that I was completing when I was in seminary, and I was supposed to lead 27 youth into that city. It was certainly not something that I would have chosen to do at that stage in my ministerial preparation. I was, in divinity school, and the prospect of missing an entire week of classes haunted me. There was also the paperwork that I was in charge of, reams of medical forms and permission slips and registrations that I would have to tally. And then there was the work schedule itself when I was down there in the city. I knew that to be on top of everything. Things got a little out of order here, which is okay. It was just sort of like the trip, actually. In order to be on top of everything, I was going to need to get up at about 6 a.m., and I'd probably not get to bed until 10 a.m. And in between, I would supervise youth and organize meals, minister to the advisors, and engage in physical labor. No, I did not want to go to New Orleans. On an intellectual level, I knew that the hurricane was horrible. The storm had destroyed lives, and then the city was abandoned. It was abandoned by the federal government and state agencies and pretty much everyone else. People with the fewest resources were made to sort through the devastation of a home of splintered furniture and missing windows and moldy carpets. For a long time, news reports said that volunteers were the one group of people who were making any kind of difference there, and that New Orleans needed their willing bodies and precious time and amateur abilities more than anything. I did know all of that. But that level was intellectual and abstract, and on a much more selfish level, I did not want to go. Instead, I wanted something else. I wanted a new MacBook. Now, I knew it was selfish and that I didn't even really need it. But the hand-me-down laptop with the Greenpeace sticker on the back was kind of clunky, and it was the wrong color, and it was also a few years old. It was 2007, and out of my student expenses, I had budgeted just enough for this new computer, about $900. My first trip after New Orleans would be a visit to the Geniuses in the nearby mall with their shiny, overpriced, white and chrome-colored, unnecessary plastic objects. That was my commitment. That's where my new computer was awaiting me. Now, one of my favorite novels that's been made into a film is Neil Gaiman's Coraline. The movie's namesake moves with her parents into a new home. This house is not glamorous. In fact, its barren wooden walls and creaking floorboards are quite ugly. Coraline hates it. She continually dreams of a better and more exciting place to live, one that is better suited to her personal whims. She hopes for a place where she doesn't have to help her parents or do chores or even have to go to school, a place where everything that she wishes for is granted. So in the middle of the night, Coraline discovers a small door that leads to a tunnel in her room. The tunnel takes her to another small door, and when she gets out, she discovers a strange new world. The world is much like her old one. It's the same house, the same family, and the same friends. The major difference is that everyone in this world is there to make Coraline happy. Her new mom gives her everything that she wants, and her new dad seems to exist for the sole purpose of entertaining Coraline. He has no needs of his own. Coraline never has to do anything in this world unless it is gratuitous and enjoyable. There is a catch that she soon discovers. The characters in this new world have one thing that is different about them. In place of eyes, they have black buttons on their face. So in order to stay in this world where she will be granted every wish, Coraline learns that she has to replace her eyes with these buttons. She must effectively blind herself to anything but her own whims. Coraline slowly comes to a realization about this demand. The people in this new world are not actually her family and friends, but they are rather illusions, traps. They are pale verisimilitudes, reflections of her own selfish desires. So Coraline has to decide whether she will allow her selfishness to blind her or whether she will escape this world of illusion for the real world that is far more meaningful, if less gratuitous. Perhaps Coraline's tastes for such an elaborate, tailored world are a bit fantastic when compared with our own. I don't know. Maybe instead of fantasizing a whole new world, we may be more like Milton Stephanides in the novel Middlesex, which is comparatively realistic when you set it next to Coraline. Stephanides is the son of two Greek immigrants, and a part of his acculturation into the United States is an increasing materialism that we see through the development of his life. His children recount the years of their childhood by the make and model of the car that he trades up annually. And Milton wants nothing more in this novel than a new home in the suburbs that is described as simultaneously outdated and futuristic, with intercoms that have stopped working and self-opening doors that his daughter gets her head stuck in on the first visit. I can somewhat relate. Now, I may not have wanted that same house with those doors, but I do struggle with the same desires for material things. I don't even need a whole world where everything is made to please me. Just yesterday, I would have settled for a cup of Starbucks and a copy of the New York Times. What's worse is that I routinely fall for the commercials on YouTube that tell me a new gadget will revolutionize my kitchen experience. And I'm also rarely able to leave Target without 3 new things that I hadn't known about before, but that I had since learned that my life would not be complete without. In other words, this sermon is not preached from a plateau of moral superiority. I left that at the entrance to the mall. But when I went to New Orleans, I found that I made somewhat of the opposite trip that Coraline did. Instead of finding myself in a dream world where everything was there to make me happy, I found myself inside of a nightmare. I remember the first day when we rode through the 9th Ward and saw the devastated structures with yards full of muddy appliances and living room couches and precious family keepsakes just strewn everywhere. The hurricane took a lot more than keepsakes, but I won't get too far into that today. All I can say is that sometimes I looked at the devastation and it was hard to catch my breath. We stayed at a Unitarian Universalist church in New Orleans, and while we were there, a woman stopped by who had lived through the storm. She told us about how she had decided to stay in her home instead of leaving the city, mostly because she could not afford to evacuate. Floodwaters came into her house on that night, and it destroyed the first floor. So as the night wore on, she climbed upstairs and huddled in a corner with her dog. It was pitch black as the wind howled and the storm began to break apart her home. Convinced that she wouldn't make it, she prayed and wept until morning. To this day, she cannot believe that she is alive. I I felt a sort of numb emptiness inside of me. The idea of returning to a place where the things that are valued are new cars and junk from Target and MacBooks made me wonder if my life wasn't becoming trivial. I felt like I had been unblinded in this experience, and I was able to see, even if for just a brief week, what was really important. Perhaps what could give meaning beyond the inconsequential satisfactions of consumerism. It was a meaning that didn't have to do with things that I found there. Naomi Shihab Nye says that happiness is a thing that comes and goes seemingly at will, leaping from one rooftop to the next, and by the time it lands on your home, it's already preparing to leave. I think that the meaning of life is sort of like that too. It has a transitory quality. It's not something that can be found for good, and it's certainly not something that can be bought. The meaning of life isn't something that you can read about in a book or nail onto your wall like a diploma. Instead, it is something that you find in giving and serving. That's what I took away from my experience in New Orleans. Because of that context where life literally depended on whether someone would choose to give and serve, it simplified things. So much else meant so very little, while giving meant everything. Meaning could be found, but only by giving yourself and your resources away to something that is larger and more important than you are. It met a need in me that was deep, and that felt good. In fact, it felt better than most of the other things in my life at that time. Now, Nicholas Kristof, in a New York Times editorial that Dave read from earlier, wrote that there are 3 basic pleasures that human beings crave: food, physical intimacy, and giving. The last one is not something that we hear about very much. Few people would have thought that giving is an intrinsic human need. In fact, it flies in the face of much political and economic theory that suggests that human beings are basically hardwired to look out for number 1. If there were no constraints, such theorists suggest, life would be simply a war of all against all. The fight for resources, for material things, is all that matters for people, according to these thinkers. Kristof argues that that's wrong. Deep down, he says, people want to give. They are generous. They desire the meaning that comes with that generosity. And according to brain scans, they may crave it just as much as they crave food and physical intimacy. I think that that's true. I have to say that in my decade of ministry, I have never once met a member who has said to me, "I really wish you would tell me how to be more selfish." No one has said, "Tell me about how meaning is for the birds and cash and prizes are all that matters." Furthermore, millions of people volunteer, they donate money, they give blood, they march to end gun violence, not because it's simply on the way to the grocery store. Instead, they make time to give themselves away so that they can give their lives meaning and purpose, so that they can commit to the things that they truly care about. When I got back from New Orleans, I felt like I had been given a tremendous gift. I had been given a privilege, one that gave my life meaning and purpose in a way that I had rarely experienced before. I looked at my savings account with $900 in it, the money for my new Mac, and I decided to do the thing that would make me feel really good, the thing that I had been really craving all along. I wrote a check out for $900 and sent it to the New Orleans Unitarian Universalist Church, the one that had been badly damaged by the flood and was trying so hard to work to rebuild the city. They needed it more than I needed a new computer, and I never looked back on that decision. I think such giving is why we are here. This is what we are all about as a beloved religious community. North Shore Unitarian Church provides opportunities for meaningful engagement with the wider world. We explore with our children the values of compassion and service, as you'll be able to see out in Fellowship Hall with the affirmation projects that are set up all over, and from our youth who talked about giving their grant away to an organization today. We also give opportunities for members to find meaning in their lives through outreach, as as you can see through our Mitzvah Day planning and all the projects that we're going to be doing on that day. We support each other in this work, even when that work is difficult and painful, even when we are shaken to the bone by the destruction that we see in the world, and there is a lot of it. We need each other so that we can have a place to give. I think it's as simple as that, and also as hard. To find meaning in your life, you have to find ways to give yourself away. My spiritual companions, the world is waiting. Amen. I love you, and blessed be.